But before we get into that conversation, let me first introduce my able panel here in studio. And joining us this morning is Professor George Wajakoya, who is a lawyer. Many thanks for joining us this morning. We also have a governance expert, Kioko Ndugwi. Many thanks for joining us in studio. Okay. And next to him is Dr. Linda Musumba, who is an advocate as well. And next to her is Dr. Tom Kriegler, who is an advocate and governance expert. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on The Political Point. And we begin with Kriegler's take on Kenya's 2017 elections yesterday at the LSK colloquium there. And Kriegler seems to think that Kenya has become too obsessed with the law, using legal procedures to settle disputes that are deemed as political disputes, so to speak. Let me begin with you, Professor Wajakoya. Do you think Kriegler hit the nail on the head and that is the way Kenya should move?
First of all, I'm very thankful to be here to meet my colleague and alumni, Warwick University, Dr. Linda Musumba. The last time I met her was in London, and I'm grateful again to see you. And then also today, I think we have gender equity here, because most of the time when I come, there's only one lady interviewing them.
Yeah, and they call them manos many times.
We thank God that our women are now taking center stage in our politics. Now, coming to Dr. Kriegler's report, Kriegler is very much conversant and versant with the Kenyan political and judicial situation. I would put a footnote first before I make my comments in a short stint. Kenya is a land obsessed with regulation. Kenya is a land obsessed with parliament making and passing legislation on everything. If we depart from that, we can also look at the system of judicial development in countries like the United States, where judicial development has been consistent with people's participation and issues raised in what we call the Lewinian theory, whereby law is not law, statute is not legislation until it's tested by the courts.
Right.
In which case, unless there is a dispute to be resolved by the courts, and the courts go through that dispute stage on stage, depending on whether the matters have been appealed or not, when it reaches and is confirmed by the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court guidelines become now the law. But in Kenya, when Kriegler first came in, he came in and he did what he did, which was not actually fully implemented. Kenyans have resorted to making laws through parliament and to going to court on every trivial matter that arises, which is very costly, time-consuming, and then now the courts have also been interfered with by the executive, and lawyers, particularly the officers of the court, and particularly judges, are not free. You can see what happened recently to the Deputy Chief Justice, where the executive interfered with her by not according her the security required, shooting one of her drivers, taking her phones away.
All right, that is something that, of course, is still an allegation, not
is,
having
but
been
then
confirmed.
who is involved? So the judiciary has become very costly, but then it's not working because there's a lot of issues and interfering, including corruption.
All right, let me come to you, Ndugwi, in terms of, Kriegler says law is about substance, elections are about perception. Many things, many court injunctions were given, especially in the run-up to the August 2017 general elections, that allowed politicians to run for elective positions despite questions of integrity having been leveled against them. Taking what Kriegler had to say, what then will be the way forward for Kenya if we do leave legal processes aside and look for a political solution? How would that look? What would that look like?
Thank you. Now, I would want to agree with Kriegler, and I also want to go a notch deeper than what he told Kenyans and Africans for that matter. My first question would be, why are elections stolen? Because it's much deeper than an allegation that an election has been stolen, and so let us run to court. Because the issue is much deeper than that. According to me, what we are faced with at the moment is actually not a political problem. What we are faced with is something deeper than that. It is an economic problem. This problem was imposed on us by the colonists, because on coming to Kenya and Africa for that matter, their sole interest was to exploit the African to boost their home economies, as had happened during slavery and slave trade. Now, when they came to Kenya, they developed only sections of the country and left other sections unattended to.
Right.
Now, it is that societal economic problem which was led to snowball over the years to acquire first ethnic, then political, and now legal dimensions. So if we could solve the economic problem, all others will flow naturally. And the only solution would be, and that is why Dugwe exists, is to come up with an economic strategy which supplements the existing economic policy which we inherited from the colonial government, so that every Kenyan is taken on board, and so that everybody feels he owns part of the country. That point forward, the issue of courts, etc., will no longer be necessary.
Right. Let me come to you, Dr. Musumba, whether you agree with that, because Kriegler, from his speech, seems to think the main problem is negative ethnicity, and that is, what resulted to the 2007 fallout after the election, and he says that is likely what is causing these political disputes in the country as we speak.
Michelle, I'd like to say that I did attend the LSK colloquium yesterday. It was a most insightful process. I think the information sharing that took place there was really, really robust. With regard to what Kriegler said, he said something that was very, very, poignant. He said that in Mexico, they had a most technologically savvy election, one where, whatever gizmos there are were used. He talked about the arrangement, the polling stations, everything was really, really well done. However, as a result of that election, there were very, very many election petitions. And then he contradistinguished this with the time when he was in the election commission in South Africa, at the time when Nelson Mandela was, had come out of Robben Island, and he was contesting. He said that during that time, the elections went over a span of 4 days. It was full of bungles, ballot papers got finished here, there. The indelible ink got finished. Basically, it was, in terms of the organization, it was catastrophic. However, as a result of that election, there was not a single election petition. So Kriegler was making the point that elections are pretty much about perceptions and their political processes, even though the law exists to be able to provide a framework within which they should take place. So as far as Kriegler was concerned yesterday, the most important thing that we need to be able to do as a country is to be able to have the necessary political settlements, which I think my colleagues have alluded to, whether it is in terms of to balance out tribe. I think this has been underscored severally, that the winner-takes-all approach that, of course, we inherited from the West is one that does not sit comfortably with our African, dynamics.
Right. All right. So moving on from that, let me come to you, Dr. Kibao. Considering if we take this into the Kenyan context, then we look at what NASA is doing, and they've been claiming over and over that forming people's assemblies to them is a political solution to a political problem. And that is basically the bone of contention here. And the conversation now is to dialogue or to oath Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka first. Is that the correct political solution?
In my view, I would certainly support dialogue. There are certainly very legitimate concerns, probably that Raila and his constituency, because he also has a big constituency, are concerned with. There has been allegations about electoral justice, but I still think that the approach to oathing, again, is not going to be helpful for this country, for this country's economy, for this country's security, for their own supporters also. Because in a state of anarchy, it would, of course, be difficult, for instance, to charge Raila and Kalonzo probably with treason. The realities might not permit that. But certain people around them might have their security threatened, for instance, if we went to anarchy, and generally many other Kenyans. The approach towards the swearing in itself, again, lacks basis under the Constitution, under the law, and even the institutional framework, because those are very express provisions. Even when we talk about the will of the people, the sovereignty of the people. Article 1 of the Constitution actually is on the sovereignty of the people. But the Constitution, again, is also very express that the will of the people is to be exercised in accordance with the Constitution. Right. And the very important institutions to deal with the electoral disputes, such as the courts, have reached a decision, first to invalidate the August elections, right, and then to validate the repeat one. And the second is that even the procedure of assumption of office is very explicitly provided for under the Constitution. For instance, for it to be legitimate, both, especially from a constitutional perspective and under the law, the Chief Justice has to be present. So there are those very express. So there's questions like such as who is to swear him in. However, this is also an opportunity to dialogue and create institutions which are going to address some of the concerns. Dr. Musumba has pointed out a very important aspect. One of the problems we have in this country is the type of elections we have. They have that element that the winner takes all. Right. Probably we need a system. We need now to start visiting and say, is the way we have the executive power the appropriate one? And two, it is also our value system. Our value system highly attaches a lot of importance to politics. That's why probably we have so much litigation now, even at the level of MCA. So we think that a political position is a solution to everything. And at times it's not. All right.
I'll take a short commercial break, but Professor Wajakoya, very briefly, when it comes to dialogue, we seem to be in a crossroads as to what kind of dialogue or what should we be dialoguing about. Because Jubilee maintains that if they are to have dialogue with the opposition, then it should only be about their 4 key pillars, you know, in terms of health, in terms of devolution. But the opposition, you know, has a completely different idea of dialogue. They want an expansion of the executive to ensure inclusivity in the country. Questions being raised as to whether really that is the face of inclusivity. They want reforms in the electoral system made, for example. And it is something that David Maraga mentioned yesterday at the LSK colloquium, addressing loopholes within the electoral system, especially that arose in the 2017 elections there. What happens when an election is annulled? What happens when one of the top candidates withdraws from an election? Are these issues that must be discussed with urgency?
Actually, as I've said time and again, Jubilee government has got a group of mindset sycophants who will not let the president out of the bag. NASA has got extremists. But going by what NASA is demanding, NASA's demands are actually making a lot of sense. You cannot, and whereas Jubilee is saying that we shall give you, we shall clothe you with our principles, our 4 principles. Yes, give me food to eat, but when you are whipping my mind, when you whip my mind, because you have fed me, but you don't set my mind free, as far as the classical theorists or modern theorists come into realism, where one's mindset is based on I having my freedoms in terms of civil liberties, in terms of economic and political liberties, another one saying, and without a governance, and another group coming in, the modern approach of classical theory, where he says that, yes, I should have my civil liberties, economic liberties, political liberties, but I need a government. Now, if we depart from that and go into realism, the Jubilee perception is losing ground as much as possible. There have been contagious issues that have been there that have not been solved. The opposition is coming up and is saying, let us go this road so that we can build a roadmap for the future generation in sustenance.
All right.
These other people are coming in to cover themselves with atrocities that are out there, and the EU has even mentioned that there was malpractices in the elections in this country. Therefore, the Jubilee should depart from that rhetoric if they want to put their party policy on all Kenyans, irrespective of what other Kenyans are feeling like. Then I'm not with them.
All right. Let's pause it there. We take a short commercial break here on Morning Express. It is just 7 days before that planned swearing in of Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka by the opposition NASA. What happens in the country within the next 7 days may just be make or break for the fate of the country. That is the basis of our discussion at this hour on The Political Point. Take a short commercial break. To stay with us, the conversation continues in just a moment.